Please welcome to the stage Mr. Michael Manfredonia from Gunnison Valley Distillery.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Manfredonia. I served for 9 years on active duty in the U.S. Air Force. And shortly after getting back from my last deployment in Iraq, I got stationed in Maryland, where some new friends of mine introduced me to the wonderful world of whiskey. Naturally, for someone from my generation, this turned into a search for good craft whiskey. And from the very first time I had my first glass of rye, I was hooked. Unfortunately, I got extremely lucky with that first distillery that I found, because the more I would explore this newfound passion of mine, the more frustrated I would grow. You see, when you find a new distillery, they've got a vodka, they've got a gin, they've got a bourbon, maybe they have a single malt, and they've got a rye. But when you show up to the tasting room, they have tons of clear spirits, probably the bourbon, but when it comes to rye, you get one of two things. Number one, they don't have any. But don't worry, they'll tell you. They release it twice a year, so follow them on social media, find out when it gets released, and then rush in because they're gonna sell out within a day or two. Scenario two, they have rye, awesome, but it's only aged 6 months? Okay, try it. It tastes like flaming motor oil. But don't worry, they'll tell you, because they're slowly aging it longer and longer, and within the next few years, they're really gonna have that taste nailed. You see, all of this stems from a pervasive culture within the craft community, that if you aren't using some secret family recipe on a tiny still, you just aren't craft. So distillers spin this marvelous tale about how they found Grandpappy's secret moonshine recipe tucked away in a shoebox in the attic. They get a tiny still, and everything's going great until they realize they need to grow and expand. Now they're forced to have to buy a larger still, and that's going to have a completely different design, and then that's going to completely change the taste of the products that made them popular in the first place. But here's the real kicker. That secret family recipe that they love to tell you about, more often than not, it's just hiding the fact that almost the entire rye craft industry uses nearly identical recipes. And consumers are starting to take notice. So the more people I talk to, the more people I find are growing frustrated with the stagnant nature of the rye industry. For those tens of thousands of people around the country that are frustrated with this mediocre status quo, Gunnison Valley Distillery is the solution. Instead of making a dozen different products of varying quality or availability, we're gonna focus on one amazing product, rye malt whiskey. And that rye malt is gonna have a spicier, bolder flavor than traditional rye whiskey, but will still be immediately recognizable. Now, what makes rye malt so amazing? Well, 99% of the rye whiskey industry uses raw, unmalted grain effectively straight from the field. But that malting process begins to sprout the grain, which breaks down those internal starches, which unlocks that bold flavor that rye is known for. With our production process having access to more of that bold flavor, we'll be able to create a truly unique whiskey. This focus on rye malt is going to manifest itself across two separate product lines. First up, aged 2 years in charred new oak barrels, is Tamichi Creek, a straight rye malt whiskey. This is going to be rye malt blended with a little bit of wheat, and it's going to be targeted towards the average whiskey drinker. Next up, aged for 4 years, is going to be our flagship product, Rustler Gulch Single Rye Malt. This is going to be 100% malted rye, and it's going to be a more premium product targeted towards a more discerning palate. And these products and this focus is going to put us at the pioneering forefront of the rye malt industry. Nationwide, there are only a handful of distilleries making rye malt, and only 2 that regularly produce a single rye malt. Even with these distilleries, we'll be the only ones focusing on this exclusively, and we'll be the only ones with enough capacity to provide this year-round. Now, a lot of you people are wondering, so what's this big deal about rye? Well, I'll tell you. Over the last decade, rye sales have grown over 1,000%. We are in the middle of America's rye revival. Now, under an ideal scenario, we would capitalize on this growth, make all of our products in-house, and everything would be great. But proper whiskey takes a minimum of 2 years to age in barrels. And there's currently a 1-year lead time on new equipment. So for this first year, I'm going to be working side by side with industry experts at an outside distillery, producing our whiskey using our recipe under contract. This has the added benefit of shortening the time it takes to get our whiskey into bottles. It only takes 2 years now. And it gives me 1 year of experience on nearly identical equipment to what we will get once we start our own production, making our exact recipes. Then, as each of our batches gets barreled at the contract facility, those barrels get brought back to Gunnison to age in our warehouse just as if we had made them ourselves. So no matter whether we make the product or it's from the contract distiller, all the whiskey in the bottles is 100% our product. While we do anticipate that we will have slow growth initially while we gain brand recognition, due to our unique product and positioning, we also anticipate strong, significant growth through year 5. And here's the best part about having that contract relationship established early on. If something happens and we can't start in-house production right away, we just extend out the contract and we can still meet all of our sales goals. No big deal. Now, a lot of you people are sitting up there looking down here and wondering, who the heck is this guy? And it's true, I'm not a local yet. But I fell in love with Colorado 16 years ago when I was stationed in Colorado Springs. And with access to the outdoors and a phenomenal community spirit, the Gunnison Valley really embodies what it means to be Colorado. And it's that feeling that made me uproot my family and move back to Colorado after so many years away. And it's that feeling that makes me super excited to raise my daughter here. Now, from a business perspective, I've been working with Russ Forrest and Anton at the city and Kathy Pagano and her team at the county, and they have been instrumental to helping me find potential locations for my distillery. We've identified a few places in and around the city of Gunnison, and depending on which location we choose, a tasting room and restaurant potentially right here on Main Street. Now, we are a small company, we are new, and we understand that it is about getting the right people with the right experience at the right time. But for right now, I am the only full-time employee, and like I said, I'll be perfecting my distilling experience working side by side with our contract facility. My wife, Amanda, who I promised I wouldn't embarrass by telling you all that she's right back there with my 2-year-old daughter tonight, will be handling our social media and front office work. My good friend Natalie has 10 years of graphic design experience, and she's been working on our logos and branding. And then as we look to bring on production staff, or start in-house production, we'll be needing to bring on 1 to 2 members to our production staff. And as we start to go into sales, we'll be needing sales reps, bartenders, etc. So, if being part of a distillery sounds really interesting, if you want to help change the craft culture, and you want to be part of this rye malt revolution, we are actively seeking investors to bring this vision to life. So if any of this sounds like you, please come talk to me, or if you just want to come talk about whiskey, we can talk for days out in the lobby, or contact me via phone, email, or social media. Thank you.
Not surprising, he nailed it. And not surprising also, if you notice the photo behind him, notice the shirt. Notice the shirt he's wearing tonight?
It's called staying on brand.
And sometimes the brand can smell like a dumpster fire if you wear it too many days in a row, which he hasn't. He's been showering. He's fine. So I appreciate your story. That was really love what you're talking about. Got a chance to know a little bit more about this malting process for rye, and looking forward to kind of seeing what that tastes like. You know, I think we all have our love for whiskey, and well, it's a love for whiskey that you have to be careful of. So tell us a little bit about I don't know if you guys are ready, but I'll just throw in a question. I'm curious about this contracted piece, and I think we hear a lot about Colorado whiskeys that aren't made in Colorado, right? And I think your expectation is to bring that here locally over time. But Is this just somebody else's blend that you're just slapping your label on, or is it different?
So that's a great question. So if you follow any bit of the whiskey industry, you've probably seen a lot of distilleries maybe catch some flack for finding out that they don't make their own whiskey. Well, what a lot of them do is it's called sourcing, and they find a distillery around the country that just has a ton of extra barrels on hand. They've already made it, it's their recipes, and they're aging in barrels, and then they just buy those barrels and slap the booze in a bottle, slap the label on it, and everybody's happy. What we are doing is we are taking our recipe to someone who just has spare time on their equipment. And so we are using our recipe on their equipment, and we found somebody that very closely matches the equipment that we will be bringing on to ensure that the taste remains as similar as possible. And so that's the difference between sourcing it, where you're just buying barrels, and contract, where it's our recipe, just we don't have the equipment yet.
That's a good answer. What's the band that sings the song, Amy, what you gonna do? Pure Prairie League. They played at Ibar Ranch last year, and I found it really funny. They were like, yeah, every time we come to Colorado, we just love having some of this fine Colorado-made whiskey. And I was like, oh, they're talking about, Coal Creek, not to mention a competitor. You can burn down their building later. But which one were they holding up? Tin Cup. And where's Tin Cup made? Good old Indiana, Colorado, which ain't in Colorado. They make it in Indiana, one of the largest facilities in the United States. So I just thought that was funny that their branding, was all about Colorado here and even in Gunnison County, and it's not even made local. So what you guys got? Questions?
We all love living in the Gunnison Valley, Gunnison County, Crest Butte, Gunnison City, unincorporated, et cetera. As you've chosen that to be your home, why choose it as the brand? So, it's a great place to live. It's a terrible place to produce and distribute something, like whiskey, would be my guess.
Sure. So for that, I would look at the fact that our target customer market initially is going to be your hunters, your fishermen, your outdoor enthusiasts that come to the valley naturally. And we're going to leverage them to take that back home. So when they come here, they can be like, I just fished Tamichi Creek, or I just hiked Rustler Gulch, and they can take that, and that's something that they can brand on. But to a further extent, it's more of just creating the identity. And so for me, with that identity being Gunnison Valley, I don't want to call it Blue Chair Whiskey, and then someone's like, well, what does that mean? There's no question of what this means. The question is, the creek's right on the south side of town. Rustler Gulch is just on the north side of town here. So it's just about creating that sense of identity.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. If you were to be funded, it would be 3 years before you could offer a product for sale.
No, if I were to be funded, it would be 2 years, because we would start with I have the contract with the contract distiller ready to go right now. And so they would make it within the next couple of weeks, and then 2 years after that, we could put product in a bottle. It would be 3 years to have what we make in-house go into a bottle.
Mm-hmm. And how do you manage your production and supply and demand when the production time, so including the aging, is so long? I mean, you really are forced to look into the future and decide how much to make, because you're placing big bets on what you're having the contract manufacturer make. And then a small tack-on question is, if you've got such a great recipe and you're bringing it to an experienced, established contract manufacturer, how do you protect your IP? Why wouldn't they just start making that themselves?
Sure. So to tackle the first question, if we knew how to answer that, I could tell you there are a lot of distilleries in Kentucky that would love to know the answer to that, because they play the forecasting game all the time trying to figure it out. And if you read into it, they miss all the time. They overproduce, they underproduce. So what we have done with our numbers, though, is look at what numbers we could find for an average craft distillery. What do they put out? And so that is we shot a little bit higher than that for what our production would be, assuming we would get close to that, but then we could then take barrels and age them longer, or do different specialty releases and things like that with those different barrels. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second half of that question.
How do you protect your IP?
Oh, how do you pick the IP? So that's a very good question. And in this, there's not a lot of IP necessarily to protect in the recipe. It's all, I would say, open source, right? You can go look up Buffalo Trace and find out exactly what their mash bill is. There's no big secret sauce to what the grain combination is, and that's one of the big frustrations with the rye whiskey industry. If you put every rye label up on a wall and threw a dart, guarantee you your dart is really going to be likely to hit a whiskey made out of 95% rye and 5% malted barley, because that's just the way people are currently doing it. With malted rye actually creates a stickier, thick mash when you're fermenting it, and not unlike molasses. So a lot of distillers, they don't want to touch it because they have to clean their product, their vessels every time. Whereas with bourbon or single malt, they could clean it every 3 or 4 times. They just don't want to have to add that extra complexity, but that will just be our process.
Cool. Questions? Ms. Krista?
My question is in regard to distribution. And as you scale, you'll be in the Gunnison Valley. It's difficult to live here, yes, but also to get material in and out. And I'm sure you've thought a lot about distribution. Can you tell us a little bit of insight there?
Sure. So getting material in isn't a big issue. The major malt manufacturers, barrel manufacturers, they ship to Colorado regularly. They're shipping to distilleries. I assume Montana is getting shipments in regularly, plus Montrose and Buena Vista in the area. And then as far as distribution goes, once a distributor signs on to pick you up, you figure out how you're going to get your product into their warehouses, and we work out those logistics. From a Colorado perspective, Colorado allows you to self-distribute. So it's just a function of me loading up pallets worth of whiskey once I've nailed what liquor stores are going to sign up for X number of cases and whatever, and we can self-distribute within Colorado, which will gain the attention of larger distributors, which when they have your attention and you look popular, they will ensure that they can work out the logistics to picking up your product and then getting it out of the area.
Sounds like you thought that one through.
A little bit.
Yeah. You're impressed with his knowledge on all this stuff? I mean, he's got it figured out, right? Yeah. Before you go, one point of clarification, the Tomichi Creek whiskey is not going to be used from Tomichi Creek water. They tried that early on down by the airport. It had sort of a ranchy flavor, if you know what I mean. So it's just part of the labeling process. It'll be filtered and polished water. Don't worry about that. And what's your daughter's name?
Mackenzie.
Where's Mackenzie?
Straight back.
Straight back. Where's she? Hi, Mackenzie. How you doing? Are you proud of your daddy? Yeah, you should be. Hands together one more time for Mike Manfredonia.